Welcome to Unit 3. In Unit 3, we're going to be talking about durable inequalities. And I'll say up front, I will apologize for my voice. I seem to be losing it, so hopefully I'll get through this video. What do we mean by durable inequalities? Well, in a book by Charles Tilly, he examines why certain groups have a much higher probability of exclusion from access to what we might call social benefits. So we would be talking beyond just economic benefits to access to status items like, getting into clubs, being considered part of a welcome part of a group and those sorts of things. And also more probably live with this group, more probably lives with the markers of poverty. So for example, not succeeding in school, having poor health, holding jobs of lower status, and so on, and often are subject to higher rates of being affected by crime or even to incarceration. So there are various markers by which we can observe that these groups may or may not be considered a part of what we might call the larger dominant society. These inequalities occur over time, so we're not talking about just simply a one-time event or something that happens once in a while, but these inequalities happen to a group of people, a group of people identified by a particular characteristic. They occur over time, and they're reinforced through the social systems and social institutions that exist, rather than being simply temporary or time limited or individually perpetuated. So these durable inequalities then have significant effects on the groups that we're going to be talking about, but they also have effects on a larger society in many kinds of ways as well. So for us in schools, and for those of us who are educators, the question is, how is it that this happens in our schools? How is it that durable inequalities are perpetuated despite the best intentions of teachers and administrators? So this is what we'll be talking about in this video. Before I do that, I want to look at, just kind of check up and make sure that we're aware that there will be a forum for Unit 3 as well. In this forum, you'll have paired readings. So rather than one reading, you'll have two readings, and they're paired in the sense that one tends to look more at the more global issues and some of the policies involved. The second reading is more specific to actual school practices. So when you bring those together, then I think they make kind of a nice pairing that gives us an opportunity to bring policy, theory, and practice together. So you will read those that are assigned to you particularly, but you'll also read the others as well. But you'll read those particularly to develop a thoughtful discussion on the forum, and the rest more for information. So a kind of a deep skim, if you want to call it that. And also in terms of the artifact assignment, which will be coming up in Unit 4, I want you to send me your idea for your artifact assignment by February 14th. Now, some of you have already gotten in touch with me and are thinking, but I want kind of clarification that this is what you'll be looking at. So you can either email me, or you can email me if you have questions and you want to talk more by Skype or whatever, and we can set that up. So those are the things that you need to be aware of in terms of assignments for this particular unit. So then let's look at what are the particular case studies of durable inequalities that we're going to be looking at in more detail in this unit. And then we will also be looking at some of those that we aren't going to be attending to the same degree, but nevertheless we'll be having a look at. Each of these issues are persistent issues. They are manifest in different ways. They affect school performance, and they're often at odds with the ways in which schooling is organized. And we've talked about that to some degree prior to this in the course. It's also important to recognize that the various kinds of durable inequalities intersect with one another in important ways. So we see, for example, poverty may intersect with sexual minorities. It may intersect with gender and gender issues in certain kinds of ways, or gender issues may intersect with sexual minorities and so on. Certainly they will intersect with other of the issues that we're going to be talking about, including race, disabilities, and so on. For example, race and poverty tend to intersect, so it's also important, or helpful rather, to consider Young's categories of oppression in relation to the various kinds of durable inequalities. For example, how is cultural imperialism, systemic violence, marginalization, powerlessness, and exploitation evident in what the authors discuss in the reading? So this is one way that you can start bringing together some of the ideas across the various units. And that will be helpful to you as you come to think about what you're going to be running your final paper on, for example, or even your project for your final project. So, and how do they relate to experiences in schools? One important category that we're not dealing with in this unit are Aboriginal issues. They're important, and they're particularly important in terms of, well, for all kinds of reasons that we'll talk about in Unit 4, but we're going to talk about them in more detail when we get to that unit. Okay, so in terms of the unit on poverty, in terms of the readings on poverty, Joseph Flassa, who's a professor at Oise University of Toronto, and Patricia Caddy, who's a researcher, a research officer with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, they worked together on this paper, and this paper is part of a collection that several of the papers from this course have used in this course. And these papers were presented at a conference that was put on by the Canadian Teachers Federation on issues of diversity and inclusion. And so their paper references in particular a study that Patricia McCaddy did, and then Joseph Flassa fleshes that out in terms of policies that are in place around issues of poverty, how those policies may in fact exacerbate the conditions of poverty, and what this means for educators and the kinds of awarenesses that educators need to have in addressing child poverty and its effects in schools. So he talks about both the micro and the macro level. Camille Wilson then talks about actually the intersection of race and poverty in an ethnographic study that she conducts on the practices of a transformative leader who is a principal in a school identified by high poverty. Camille Wilson is a professor at the University of Michigan, which, as you will well know, would be sensitive to those issues in particular because of the kinds of economic disparities that are increasingly prevalent in the state of Michigan. And so she looks at the effects of the increasing poverty in the state and the particular location of the school that this principal is practicing in, and attempts to address the effects, and this principal attempts to address the effects of racism and poverty using an ethic of critical care. Now, Wilson particularly references the work of Nell Noddings, whose work has been very, very influential in talking about an ethic of care and how that influences or should influence the practices that we engage in schools. And I would encourage any of you who have an interest in this to have a look at those readings, because some of those readings, because they're very, very helpful in kind of pushing our thinking about more theoretically about what we often do, and that is to care about the kids in our classrooms. What does that really mean? And how can we extend that to even the curriculum that we teach and so on? So it's a very interesting area. But this principle tries to enact it in a critical way within the constraints of shifting policies that have attempted to divide the social and the academic. And of course, an ethic of care is premised on bringing together the social and the academic. So this creates tensions that Wilson explores. In terms of the case study around sexual minorities, Andre Grace and Christopher Wells, who are both professors at the University of Alberta and have been highly influential not only in the province of Alberta, but really across the country in many ways, in terms of providing a wealth of information and recording the kinds of ideas that people are engaged in attempting to support and enable students who identify with sexual minorities and find that schools in many ways are not keeping up with the social cultural changes around them, and also the policies that exist in Canada in support of sexual minorities. So they provide a very interesting article that explores both the policies. First of all, I lays out some kind of theoretical constructs around what's happening and how might we think about sexual minority students in our schools, the policies that exist, and then some of the strategic action that people are taking across the country. So it's a very helpful article in that sense. Wimmer, Chinnery, and Morrison look specifically at what happens in schools with students who are sexual minorities, where homophobic behavior is exhibited, and what do teachers do about it? It's a mixed methods methodology where they quantify expressions of homophobic slurs and homophobic behavior and that sort of thing. And then a qualitative study, they bring that together with a qualitative study in talking to students and teachers about how they encounter that kind of behavior in schools. And then the last case that we're going to be looking at, but certainly not the last of the durable inequalities that exist in schools, is gender. And I included gender because it tends to be, it's so core often to the kinds of behaviors that are exhibited in schools that in some ways it becomes invisible. And so I think it's really important for us to pay close attention to the effects of gender. So in my article, which also is from that collection for the Canadian Teachers Federation, I provide an overview of some of the recent historical landscape and gender policy that is over the last couple of decades, as well as the ways in which gender organizes the work of education. So who does what in schools? Who are the teachers? Who are the principals? How is gender shaping some of those locations in the hierarchy, as well as the gender practices in providing equitable educational opportunities. And then Alina Lahelma, from Finland, she explores the line between harassment and we're just having fun, that kind of gray area where students will in fact be enacting gendered harassment in schools, but try to cover over their trail, so to speak, by saying, well, we're just having fun. So how is it that we can recognize and kind of analyze that line that exists, and how then can that help us in our own practices in schools? And so I just wanted to make note of the fact, as I've mentioned already, that there are many forms of durable inequalities in the world in which we live, that world that's coming to our classrooms in so many ways. And some of those include class. I've referenced that to some degree. Class is attached in many ways to poverty, but it's also attached to things like cultural capital. So you might have suddenly acquired a lot of money for whatever reason, but you may not have the cultural capital that enables you to become a part of the upper class, for example. You haven't attended the right schools, you don't dress in quite the right way, that sort of thing. So class has various elements to it beyond just acquisition of capital, but that is economic capital. But certainly that's one of the important indicators. And it has been a way to differentiate and exclude for centuries now. And so it's certainly one of the very durable inequalities that we need to be attending to. Race is dealt with to some degree in an earlier article, but it is certainly deserves some attention outside of just that one article. And we may have a chance to take it up later in the course. Language is an interesting one, both the lack of access to dominant language as well as how we express language. So it could be through a speech impediment, for example, or it could be through accents are often tend to be taken up in an exclusionary way. So language can be a form of durable inequality as well. Religion, increasingly in North America, is being is a category of exclusion. Certainly it has been over the centuries in many ways, but for example, we see this week the new president in the United States is going to be signing an executive form that will exclude, based on religion, those who wish to come to the United States, and also prohibit refugees who are often attached to a particular religion as well from access to the benefits of the United States. And so this is very, although it's probably been simmering under the surface, it's certainly coming to the fore in a very visible way. And so it's one that we need to be paying attention to. Culture and cultural expression is another one, and that could be both in terms of geographic divisions indicating cultural differences, but also cultural differences within societies. It could even be attached to cultural expression. So, hip hop as compared to, I don't know, jazz or whatever, so there are various ways in which these various cultures tend to include or exclude. And then, of course, the differently abled. So emotional, physical, and mental disabilities and how they tend to be areas of exclusion. So what does this mean for school leadership? Well, for school leaders to deal with these issues in any kind of meaningful way, they certainly need to be aware of them. And so this is an attempt to at least begin that process. There's certainly much more that needs to be done and could be done through reading and accessing information, workshops, and that sort of thing. It may need reconsidering the normative structures in the schools. And some of you in the forum are talking about the ways in which your schools are already doing that. So how is it that those normative structures, the everyday practices in schools, reinforce certain kinds of acceptable cultural and social norms and do not accept others? And who does that include and who does that exclude? Awareness of wider social pressures and their differential effects. So when policies are enacted, who does that exclude and who does that include? And as those who have some influence perhaps in that policymaking process, how can our voice be a part of engaging with those who are making the policy so that that awareness becomes a part of the policy that's enacted, so that these kinds of issues are considered. And then strategic involvement, becoming involved with groups that are going to be helpful in supporting those who are excluded because of those durable inequalities, through becoming aware and acting strategically with others, letter writing, doing whatever we can to influence others so that awareness becomes a part of the norm. So that's all I have to say about those readings. You'll be taking them up and discussing them in much greater depth and detail in the forum, and I'll look forward to your input. I may jump into the forums a little more this time because I haven't gone into a lot of detail about each of the readings for lack of time, for one thing. But I do hope that I do hope that this has at least laid the groundwork, and I look forward to your input on the forums with great interest. So best of luck.